Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another episode of Upthinking Finance. Philosopher Alan Watts once said, "I have realized that the past and future are real illusions, that they exist in the present, which is what there is and all there is." Well, it's finally here, the United States presidential election of 2024. And I think it's probably be pretty difficult to overstate the significance of this election, obviously here in the United States, but really as it impacts people all across the world. And so for that reason, I'm really happy to bring back a friend and associate of mine, Alex Krainer, who, of all the people I've met over the last few years, has just a broader and deeper network of people all across the globe. And so he brings a very unique perspective at a very important time. Alex is a former hedge fund manager, futures trader, and market analyst. He's a creator of the iSystem trend following model through Krainer Analytics based in Monaco. He, my partner Amy Lenoble, and I collaborated to build out a trend following model that uses ETFs that's available for investors here in the United States. And Alex also has written a number of books. In fact, one of my all-time favorites here, the Trend Following Bible, which is no longer in print thanks to Amazon. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, Alex is the father of two boys. So it's my pleasure to welcome back my friend and associate coming to us from the beautiful Principality of Monaco, my friend Alex Krainer. Alex, welcome back.
Good to be with you, Emerson, again.
So, let's start just with kind of the obvious. Is it really possible to overstate the significance of this election? Surely for those of us who've been living here in the U.S. for the last 4 years. But, I think it's fair to say there's a pretty significant global repercussions that are going to come from this.
It is possible to overstate it, but I think it's regardless of that, I think it's hugely significant. I think it's going to have enormous impact on the future of the United States and the future of the world, provided that the elections do happen, because there are many well-informed voices out there who are saying that the election might not happen, that it might be possible to sabotage it in some way. And the last one I read about today is that the 100 troops with the THAAD system that were sent to Israel, and possibly further THAAD systems with more troops that will be sent between now and November 5, are sent there as a tripwire, that it is possible that Israel will launch an attack on Iran, that these THAAD systems will be a prime target for the Iranians because it has a very powerful radar. And one of the first things you want to eliminate is you want to blind your adversary, right? So that those THAAD radars would be among the top prime targets, which would inevitably kill some American servicemen. And if that happens, then almost inevitably the United States is going to get drawn into a bigger war. And at that point, I forget now the name of the act, but there's some kind of an act on the books in the United States that's called maybe War Preparations Act or something like that, that would allow the acting president to suspend the election because of the war. So, who knows?
Is Joe Biden still the acting president?
Well, the Joe Biden is the acting sock puppet, but I think that there's a good grounds to believe that it's the people around him who are actually in charge, that he's active a handful of hours a day, and who knows what he does and whether he's aware of all the intricacies of schemes and agendas going on around him. And then, I have to say, from my own point of view, I watched very carefully his recent conversation with Barack Obama, which was filmed. And I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, but the way I read the body language between these two is that one of them is the boss, the other one is the underling, and Joe Biden ain't the boss. So The point being, it's a problem when people aren't sure who is in charge. But it's also a problem on several levels, because if you're going to send the American troops into World War III, patriotic Americans will fight if they know what they're fighting for, if it's for their freedoms, their families, their way of life, and so forth. But in this case, it's not so clear. They were sent to Israel to defend Israel. Well, that's a different country. And still, if you believed in your leadership, if your generals were upstanding people that you feel a bond of loyalty with, if your president is somebody that you like and respect, then even if they give you orders, go risk your life to defend Israel, they might go. But if the orders are coming from we don't know who exactly, and for the purpose which we also don't know exactly, people might be very reluctant to fight. So, the problem being that if you have an illegitimate president or person who is perceived to be legitimate, then that makes the whole, command and control structure extremely wobbly. And so even if there is this complex conspiracy afoot to prevent the elections from taking place, that doesn't mean that the conspirators will be able to fulfill their agenda.
So you made a comment, actually, we were talking about earlier, just I made a comment about that interview you did on the Duran, and you talked about everybody's at a different point on their journey. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because what you just said, there's an underlying presumption that a person listening to that is aware of what's really going on, and I know that sounds in what's really going on. My wife made a comment. It's like we're operating and everybody's in a different reality right now. We're not all locked. No, I mean, really, it's like that, it's like timelines converging or something. But, we talk to people sometimes and they're still hung up on things that are just, is just Trump like women. And, in issues. I mean, I was even going to get into some of the tax stuff, the economics of it. It almost seems, really kind of insignificant in some ways at this point. I mean, I guess it's important, but there's a presumption that what we're dealing with is the fall of an establishment that's been entrenched for, I mean, everybody has a different starting point, whether it's, some say 50 years, some will go back to, the foundations of this country and beyond, or, before. But it seems like we're getting to, as you kind of watch things unfold, and you mentioned this when we had our interview with John Waters, a couple of months ago. But there's victories along the way, but it sounds like it's a system that's just trying to hang on, and it's like the cat's claws on the curtain, and eventually they're going to get pulled off. But it's just how much collateral damage is there between that point and where we are now.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that, and I think that again, depending on how you slice it, you could say it's the end of a system, of the post-war system. You could say that it's the end of several centuries of continuity of a given system of governance, or you could say that it's the end of 2,500 years of continuity of the given system of governance. And when I say system of governance, this is exactly how people in power characterize it. They say that this is not a clash between the United States and Russia, the United States and China, Israel versus Lebanon, Israel versus Palestine, and so on and so forth. We see these clashes going on everywhere, and increasingly, what we're experiencing instead is a clash between two systems of governance. This is how people, close to the seat of power characterize it. And the two systems of governance that are opposed to one another is, on the one hand, you have the Western oligarchic, imperialistic, neo-colonial system of governance. And then on the other side, you have the whole rest of the humanity, including the populations of the countries where this Western system of governance is headquartered, being, primarily, if you ask me, it's the city of London and Wall Street. And so I think that the people who are the vested interests behind the Western oligarchic neo-colonial system of governance are the money-lending oligarchies, which are, slowly but surely losing the grip on power, because their power has been for centuries based on their ability to issue credit and allocate it the way they like, to whom they like. And on the other hand, to keep control of the masses at home through lawfare, police, secret police, and such systems of repression, and abroad through projection of power, but mostly through the old divide and rule strategies. And so I think their playbook has been well studied and well understood by the likes of China and Russia and Iran. And now, for the first time in centuries, West no longer has primacy in advanced weaponry. So today, not only Russia, but also China and also Iran and Iran's proxies in the region have advanced weaponry for which the United States and NATO have no answer. We've seen multiple strikes either on Israel or on ships in the Eastern Mediterranean or in the Red Sea, struck with precision, with rockets that our air defense systems were unable to intercept. Well, when the Ansar Allah, the Houthis in Yemen, demonstrate the ability to strike a target in Israel or to sink a ship in the Red Sea with pinpoint accuracy, that also tells you that they can do the same to the United States carrier strike groups. And the United States carrier strike groups have been, since World War II, the primary means of force projection. And so now what that tells you is, A, that more and more countries around the world are availing themselves of these technologies, and B, that Israel, which in and of itself is unable to sustain itself and to defend itself, it's surrounded by a sea of Arabs who are seething angry against Israel at the moment. And the only way that Israel could sustain and defend itself is by by the United States having its back. Well, we have seen now that the United States can no longer bring their destroyers and frigates and aircraft carriers where they want. They have to keep them away, outside of the range of the rockets that could be fired by Iraqi forces or by Yemeni forces at them, which means that Israel is there starting a big fight, and it's, quote unquote, Big Brother is not going to be able to come to their defense, or if they do, they're going to do so at their own massive detriment.
Okay.
Sorry, you asked.
I know, right? I'm thinking, okay, this is what's weighing on voters. I mean, I'm looking at just a breakdown of and maybe I'm trying to think if this, because part of this doesn't seem relevant. I'm looking at Trump's policies versus Harris. These are domestic policies, and without getting into the details, I mean, Kamala Harris, she's all about tax increases, corporate tax increases, stock buyback increases, estate tax increases, reducing standard deductions, extending the tax credit that went into place under Trump's administration that expired at the end of next year, but only to anybody that's under $400,000 of income. And then Trump is all about reducing corporate taxes, extending out the tax cuts he put in place. I'm reading this stuff, deductible auto loans. There's a lot of cool stuff here on the home front, but it almost seems like, what difference does it make? You know what I mean? You kind of wonder, and then you get into, as long as I'm on this, then you get into, China. It's got a whole separate section here, and they're both in alignment with the, putting restrictions on certain sectors of the Chinese economy. Harris has more targeted tariffs, and Trump's just a flat 60% across the board. He's got targeted the semiconductor industry, a number of things. And one thing I found also interesting in here too, in the Trump policy, which his stuff, I will say this, you're trying to be somewhat objective here. His policy outlines are very specific, and there's a lot of them. On Harris's side, they're just very general, and they don't seem, from my view, that there's not a lot there. There's not a lot of meat. It's very non-committal. It's just kind of stuff that's sort of, increasing the minimum wage what difference does that make when you have inflation the way it's been the last 4 years? But there's one thing that was interesting here too, that Trump wants to, he's considering wanting to remove the United States from the World Trade Organization, which then I presumably also, puts into question the role of the IMF, because those are both locked in step. And I know you've talked a number of times about, the role of the IMF in the world, and they're kind of the bullies on the street, I think, when it comes to global finance. So I guess if you're a voter here, I don't know if this is a fair question to ask you, but I really can't come up with one that really is any more direct and relevant at this point. But, if you're voting, I guess, for economics purely, and Trump, it's a very U.S. first, make America great again. It's a very, almost an isolationist policy. I suppose if that's, that would be the draw if you're an American citizen, versus Harris, which I think it's fair to say it's just more of the same. I don't know if there's anything different there. It really doesn't sound like there's anything different there. Why would you, if you're voting as an American for your country first, what's the potential trade-off depending upon which of these candidates you vote for from your perspective, and how does that how does that impact globally? That's probably a real long answer, but that's kind of the thing I'm really interested to hear your perspective on.
I would take all of these statements about, we're going to lower taxes, we're going to do this and that. I would take it more as, making promises to voter to encourage them to vote for you. Which of these promises they will be able to fulfill remains to be seen, but they don't have a whole lot of maneuvering space, either one of them. I do believe that Trump will probably go with some sort of a corporate tax cut as a job creation measure, which, whatever it might prove effective or not, I would be very, very skeptical. Kamala Harris's promises, however, I would take them with a large boulder of salt. I wouldn't believe it for as far as I could throw her. And as you know, I'm not an American, but my children are. So this is not all very distant from me in the sense that it's very, very relevant. So I follow it closely. And to my mind, there's only one choice in this election, and that's Donald Trump. And regardless of how anyone might feel about him as a person, he's clearly a very flawed individual. But we're not going to get anywhere if we imagine that we might be able to vote a saint into the office, into the White House. That's number one. Number two, it's also clear that a candidate for presidency at this stage cannot come out in the open and say, openly what they want. I'll give you an example. Israel has been accused by the International Court of Justice of committing war crimes in Palestine, in Gaza. Nevertheless, all the candidates for office in the United States are falling over themselves to say how much they support Israel. To the end, to the last dead Palestinian, I suppose. It doesn't matter. This is like an unchanging constant in the American politics. And I think that even if they personally didn't feel that way, they would still stay on that message, because we see what happens to candidates who speak otherwise, who try to have a balanced view and then express it, and they blunder into expressing it. And the perfect example was in the UK, the leader of the whole Labour party, Jeremy Corbyn. His career was completely destroyed. They labeled him an anti-Semite, and he was finished. He was replaced by Keir Starmer, Mr. Establishment. And so nobody wants their political career to end that way. So they all keep a certain, messaging to make sure that they're not sabotaged and blown up by the media, by this, media harangue, hysteria, turning people into, anti-Semites or misogynists or, homophobes, or what else is unpopular, communists or socialists or whatever. So the way politicians express themselves is, I think, pre-election posturing. But to my mind, Donald Trump remains the only candidate to vote for, is because he's independent of this whole military industrial complex, big banks, big ag, big pharma complex, which we have seen how they've shaped the policies of the Biden administration. And we've also seen that Donald Trump, when he was in power, did not start any new wars for 4 years. And not only did he not start any new wars, he did try to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. He tried to withdraw troops from Syria. He was out explicit that he wants to withdraw American troops from Germany. And he wanted to, roll back the American imperial overstretch. Whereas the Biden administration brought us where we are, which is on the precipice of World War III, which could turn out to be a nuclear war, in which case, most of us are going to go. That is, the lucky ones are going to go straight away. The not so lucky ones are going to languish until they slowly wither. So that's not a fun prospect. And it's entirely on the shoulders of the Biden administration. And I think that a vote for Kamala Harris is a vote for the continuity of that exact policy. Only worse, because you're clearly voting in a person who is way out of her depth, and clearly the policy will be pursued by people in the shadows. Could be people like Barack Obama, Valerie Jarrett, Susan Rice, all of those fine people from the Obama administration, who now get to pull on the levers of power without the accountability, because they're doing it in the shadows. And then there's the puppet president at the moment. There's Joe Biden. Later it might be Kamala Harris, but they will have free reign, and they will be able to pursue exactly the same policies that brought us where we are now.
One of the things I said in the intro is just how, you have a real global reach. I mean, your network is from people I've met, over the last few years, pretty broad and wide. I mean, you just know a lot of people. And sometimes I think, I look here and you talk about these things and these risks, and I'll be honest with you, it's just sometimes hard to really embrace the gravity. I don't know what it is. I think in some senses, and I feel like I'm pretty awake to what's going on, but I feel like there's a numbness. I mean, look at this election. You've had two assassination attempts. You've got one candidate who didn't even get a vote from a delegate to be even representing her party. In fact, I just read somewhere, I think that there's one of the British political parties is coming over here to campaign for Kamala Harris coming to the US. We've just become, it's almost like this corruption and these crises, and it just becomes like business as usual. I read these policies and I think, how much of this stuff even really, matter? We want to think it matters because it maybe has in the past, or we'd like to think it did, but does it really, and so my question to you and all that, my little rant there is, you see a lot of people everywhere. I mean, do you think most people are kind of waking up to what we're dealing with? I mean, or is there still just a faction of people that are kind of hanging on to or don't know where to go with it?
I think that we'll never have a situation where everybody's going to be awake to what's going on. But I think that we are now in a much, much better position than we ever were in the past. I go back a long way carrying the badge of a wacky conspiracy theorist, because, I was 21 years old when the war in the former Yugoslavia broke out, and nothing made much sense. So I've been reading newspapers between the lines for probably the last 35 years, and one of the first things that I learned is never to believe anything that's coming through the official channels. And it's always the deeper you go into rabbit holes, the more interesting things get. But I think that several things happened in the last few years which have radically changed the way people perceive their reality. One of them is the advent of the internet and social networks. People can, connect directly one-on-one from anywhere in the world to anywhere in the world. They can see what's going on elsewhere in the world almost in real time, reported by real people who were there. And then, in addition to that, we had this pandemic, which didn't make sense on so many levels that people started questioning absolutely everything. Of course, these were not the events that kind of ruined a pristine image of the government as the responsible, accountable do-gooders for the greater benefit of society. We already had, the global war on terror and the 9/11, and so there was already some fertile ground for people to lose faith. And I remember that I looked at polls of people's trust in the media from before the pandemic, from I think 2017 or something like that. And something like 70% of Americans didn't believe the mainstream media on main issues. And once people don't believe the mainstream media, that means that they go to seek truth elsewhere. And, if you talk to people around you in everyday conversation, people generally come away frustrated because, as I mentioned, everybody's in a different stage of their awakening. Everybody recognizes the full picture at a different level and in a different way. So we're not yet at a point where we can all agree, yes, this is what we're looking at. Everybody is in agreement. But at the same time, we can see the reactions on the other side. And we've seen over the last few months, in several incidences, people like John Kerry, people like Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, people like Alexander Soros, George Soros' son, and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, each one throw a kind of a tantrum about them losing the control of the narrative, about misinformation and disinformation being the greatest threat to them because it's frustrating their ability to implement policy. And I think that Alex Karp may have dropped the best line when he said a few months ago, he said, and that was when, when the whole thing started with kids in the universities protesting Israel's assault on the Gaza Strip. And Alex Karp said that if we lose the intellectual battle, you won't be able to deploy any army, any Western army anywhere in the world. So they understand what's at stake, and they understand the extent to which they have lost their maneuvering space. And clearly the reason is that we are waking up, that we are increasingly awake to what is being done. And, once you see those things, you can't unsee them. And so once you realize that you've been deceived most of your life about most things, that people don't just say like, oh, I guess they fooled us. And then you go back to, throwing barbecues and watching TV. People then discuss, they get intensely focused on these things. They discuss, they research, they read, and ultimately, you get public opinion pressures that throw policy agendas off course. And this is why I think these people who are in power are so vexed about, what they call misinformation and disinformation, but which in reality is people just figuring it out on their own rather than hanging on to whatever MSNBC or CNN serves up. That poll would imply that it didn't change since like 2017. I think it's a lot worse. But these, they also use polls to lie to us. I looked at a poll by Gallup also about Kamala Harris's and Joe Biden's approval ratings. And I think the poll that just came out earlier this month, the most recent poll, Joe Biden was at 39% and Kamala was at 46%. I mean, the idea that 40% of American people actually approve Kamala Harris's job performance is just simply surreal. Who did they poll? They must have polled her closest friends.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. I had a client of mine the other day. We were talking about this, and he made the comment. In fact, I think he read. Actually, he subscribes to your Substack, and the question is just how do you know what to believe anymore, in general? Because like you said, when the media is lying to you, these things that's the thing of it is I just, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, but I think most of us just assumed you just rely on, oh yeah, the poll, things that just are like a natural part of your life. I've shared this on another podcast, maybe it was with you and John, where, the polls close at 8:00 in California and it's 45 electoral votes to the Democrats. I mean, it's just, that's a given. That's the way it is. Well, why? How do we even know that's, what I mean? And that's the point you get to. You start questioning all this stuff and it just opens up more questions. And then you get to a place of, what do you believe? Where, and I think at least for me, you start to get to a point where you just rely on your own life's experience, the own work that you've done. And then there's some kind of a spiritual component in there that just, you have, that inner voice, whatever you want to call it, Holy Spirit, whatever, that just kind of confirms or denies things and can really be a source. And I think that's part of it. I almost think that my wife and I talk about this a lot, but a lot of this whole, what we're living in has been so set up to draw us away from inside, whatever that divinity, whatever you want to call it, to where you disconnect. You know what I'm saying? And so it's almost like we're finding ourselves again, and being realizing that we do have a kind of a compass, maybe in a sense, to kind of guide through this stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Emerson, and that's an empirical fact. The fact that maybe today you figure out something makes it much more likely that many other people will figure out that exact same thing very quickly or almost immediately as you. And I think that scientists have made experiments with those things where, they would train rats to figure out a big maze, and then when rats in some experimental setting in the United States figure out a maze, then the rats, let's say in Japan and Australia, were much quicker to figure out that exact same maze than they otherwise were. And I mean, you have many of these scientists that we know about, like Nikola Tesla and Max Planck, and who always used to say, I don't know where the knowledge I have comes from. Nikola Tesla used to talk that he used to say that his brain is merely the receiver, and that the knowledge comes from some field that he knows exists. He only doesn't know what it is or where it is. And I think that that's us being connected in some mysterious way that we don't necessarily know what or how, but it is. I think it is very, very clear that we are a species that's built for collective intelligence rather than individual intelligence. Not that individual intelligence doesn't exist, but we are really a creature of collective action. And we also have very interesting empirical evidence in that respect in what was beautifully described in James Surowiecki's book called "The Wisdom of Crowds." And just as an example, science already in the 19th century, Francis Galton noticed that, in these fairs in England, they would have, let's say, they would display an animal, a cow, and they would have people cast votes of the weight of that cow. What does that cow weigh? And of course, all the individual votes were either wildly off course, off, or they were closer to the actual weight. But what Galton realized is that when he averaged all the guesses, that the answer, the collective answer, was something like 0.03% off of the animal's actual weight. And since that time, scientists have conducted this same experiment in 1,000 different varieties. And I think maybe you've even seen them. When I was in high school in the United States, I remember that they brought a car, and in the trunk of the car, there was like a pile of pennies. And then, the game was guess how much money was in that truck. I didn't know anything about the wisdom of crowds at that point. But this was clearly one of those things. Or, they'll put a big jar of marbles or something, and they will ask people to guess. Anyway, the point is that the almost invariably, and it depends on certain conditions. So they have to be able to ascertain the thing directly. They have to make their decisions, independently. And there has to be no, like if you look at a jar of, let's say, marbles, and you say, like, oh, I think there's about 1,000 of them in here, then you give the answer 1,000. If somebody stands there and say, like, my gosh, there's got to be at least 10,000 marbles in this jar, and they skew people's opinions, then it doesn't work so much. But so if these certain conditions are fulfilled, it turns out that the collective answer is almost always better than the best individual answer. So that's a very strong indication that we are a species built for collective intelligence. And I think that maybe at this stage of history, we are noticing collective intelligence at work, because I think that we are, in the middle of very profound crisis. We are at the stage of the whole system kind of imploding in on itself, and I think that we've come out successfully on the right side of at least one major pitfall, and that was the pandemic. Because if you'll remember, they were promising us that the old normal was never coming back. And they were quite adamant about that. Well, we got the old normal back. And I don't know how that happened, but it did happen. We didn't have a leader. We didn't have somebody who came out and said, everybody bring your pitchforks. We're going to take down this agenda. I think we just killed it with 100 million cuts, because there were so many people who started asking questions, who started expressing doubts, who started spreading misinformation and disinformation. But the sum total of everything is that the agenda collapsed, and I'm very hopeful that in the same way the World War III agenda is going to collapse as well. Well, I know for a fact that the World War III was meant to already begin, and it was meant to start between Russia and collective NATO, collective West. That was supposed to be the big war, but that didn't happen either. And so the plan B was the Middle East. And I'm very hopeful that we will be able to skirt this conflict in the Middle East as well.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I mean, there's been the monkeypox. There's been they try to go back to the pandemic situation again, and that hasn't really taken any, gotten any steam behind it. And a number of other, it's like the same old playbook. And yet, kind of like you said in our last conversation, that there have been a lot of small victories. It seems like things are getting exposed. It seems like, you read little blurbs here. Like I said, that TD Bank situation is actually a pretty big deal, because if they're laundering money, I'm sure, you know what I mean? They're not the Lone Ranger out there.
I have no doubt that they were laundering money. I mean, laundering money is pervasive. It's being kept hush-hush. But you remember in 2012, HSBC got busted laundering money for Mexican drug cartel and for terrorist organizations around the world. And they got off with a slap on their wrists and a small parking ticket. And we also learned that many other banks were doing the same. I think that Wachovia was caught, UBS, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, many of these banks. In fact, I mean, if we're mentioning money laundering, I think it's important to understand that money laundering is the mother of all crimes. Money laundering is what makes cartels even possible. There wouldn't be Mexican drug cartels or Colombian drug cartels. They wouldn't exist if the banks didn't launder money for them.
So I guess, let's just assume, let's be positive, because I know you're a positive guy. We have an election. I mean, it's not like all of a sudden we're going to wake up on, whatever the day after the election is, November 5th, and everything's going to be right in the world. But and you know what? Before we get to that, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you your opinion on this too. When you see men like Elon Musk out there stumping for Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr., that was actually probably for me one of the more powerful political moments when those two were on stage for the first time, because RFK Jr., I mean, I'm a big fan of his dad, and he just seems like a person that, to give up his political aspirations, and some could say he didn't have a chance, but I mean, he was getting attacked. But, to go over to the other side, so to speak, for the greater good, which is, all the work he's done on health, and he's exposing all these, these issues that we've kind of all known about with stuff that's in our food and everything else, and the whole medical and, pharmaceutical industry. I mean, what does that tell you? Because to me, it's one thing, okay, Taylor Swift says, go out and vote for so-and-so. I mean, that whole actor actress thing is kind of just, I think most people are over that by now. But when you have men like, I mean, because Trump isn't exactly pushing, in fact, he wants to take away the car credits, the electric car credits, if I remember right. Yet, you've got the king of the EV out there, encouraging people to vote for him. I mean, what does that tell you?
The whole system is on the road to perdition, and many people recognize that. And I think that the fact that a very prominent Democrat would switch sides for the greater good is on the one hand, it's a testament to their integrity, but it's also a testament to the very high degree of jeopardy that we're in, and that they recognize that if the people who are in power now continue, if they're not challenged, that things are going to get so much worse, that it's better now to put my weight behind the more likely candidate, even if it's not me, even if it's not my party, than to angle for I don't know, a vice presidency or whatever he might have been able to finagle out of the DNC, which I'm sure that if he joined forces with them, that he could have asked for very considerable concessions. And I think that throughout history, there are many examples where parts of the oligarchy, oligarchy, or people who are, let's say, very wealthy, very powerful people in the system, actually make common cause with the ordinary citizens because they have to, because they see that the whole system is going to fall apart. In Rome, in Roman Empire, the people who challenged the system were that we know of. I'm not talking about slave revolts. I'm talking about people like Julius Caesar, like the Gracchi brothers, like the Catiline. There were many of these Roman oligarchs or aristocrats who revolted against the aristocracy because they were too far gone, too decadent, too unrestrained in the way they were ruling Rome, in the way that they were sending their armies to wage war here and there, overstretching the whole system, plunging the whole empire into completely unpayable debts. And so they decided at that moment to push back, and the only way that they could push back is by making common cause with the ordinary people. And so, we see that today. Elon Musk's a billionaire, and he probably, like every billionaire, he's more interested in his own what's good for Elon Musk than he is for what's good for Emerson Fersch or Alex Krainer. But at this point, he cannot take on the entrenched oligarchy on his own. Neither can Donald Trump. Neither can Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So they united, but they also made themselves champions of the people. I don't think it's controlled opposition. I don't think it's disingenuous. I think it's real and very genuine, because I think that's the only way to push against this extremely destructive, pathogenic oligarchy who is in charge of the whole system now, not just in the United States, but also in Europe, in the UK, in Japan, in Australia, and Canada, and so forth. And so, this system of governance is not for the ages. If it's not opposed, if somebody doesn't reach for the steering wheel, we're going to end up like Thelma and Louise.
Anything going on in Europe that gives you hope? I mean, again, we read what we read. I know you talked a lot about Britain on that podcast interview, and it sounds like the clamps have really come in. Again, to me, it's just the more I think, and I'm just going to go to the devil operates better in the dark. When we're just kind of wandering around, and not, aware of what's going on. But now the moves are very obvious, and so it just smacks of a desperation, which I know we've talked about. But I mean, do you see I said something in Austria, some very conservative party, I think, took over there. I mean, do you see any signs? Because, there's that saying, what happens in Europe happens here, that maybe show sort of a light of where things potentially can start heading, or is everything just really under the pall of this global, multi-crisis, I guess you could say?
I think that similarly as in the United States, the hope is kind of growing from the grassroots. And we see also in one nation after another, candidates that are opposed to the ruling oligarchies come into power, or at least they win the vote of the populace. We've seen that in the UK, in some local elections, like George Galloway surprisingly won his district a few weeks ago. Then we had the win of the Conservative Party in Austria. Same thing happened earlier in Slovakia. Viktor Orban remains very strong and popular in Hungary. Giorgia Meloni in Italy. Italy is a very important part of the European Union, and Giorgia Meloni was one of the very faithful pupils of the European integrations. But now she's breaking ranks as well and causing a stir. And I think it's all driven by popular pressure. These politicians see which way the winds are blowing, and they are coerced. They are absolutely coerced to act accordingly. They cannot do otherwise. And so I think that the winds of change are coming from below, from the ordinary people. The people in power are doing everything they can to sabotage the actual working of genuine democracy. And so, we see that in France, they practically cheated the French people out of their, elections, because Emmanuel Macron appointed the prime minister that nobody voted for. Well, not nobody, but his party came in fourth. They won something like 7% of the popular vote. Yet he became the nation's prime minister. But it doesn't change the mood at the grassroots levels. So they can cheat here and there. They can give themselves an extra lease of life, but they're only accelerating their own downfall eventually. And I think that is inevitably coming. And I have to say that part of what makes me optimistic is also that they are now up against very, very hard opposition in Russia. And I've been a close watcher of Vladimir Putin's government and of what's going on in Russia for many years now, and the reality is very, very different from the way it is being presented in the West. And I see a ray of hope coming from the East, rather than this dark doom and gloom of some evil Eastern invading, barbarians at the gate, as they like to say. I think that Russia will catalyze very positive changes in the world.
So I'll get back to my last question before we wake up on November 6th. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to make predictions. I mean, I think Trump, these polls seems to be the likely winner just on a bunch of different reasons. But I mean, I know you've had Democratic senators come out and say they're going to question the results. Their lawyers are ready. I mean, and you just wonder if the elections do happen, if we just get caught, no matter whether Kamala were to win or Donald Trump were to win, that we get caught up in some kind of a litigious situation and sort of go into a purgatory for a period of time. I mean, does that seem like a likely option possibly as well?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure. I think that the last time around, this is what we got. This time around, because remember, the Democratic Party, this is not going to be very clear, but this is my very strong impression. The Democratic Party staged a kind of a covert coup, and they have at least partly eviscerated the system of checks and balances and the legal framework around the way power is being exercised. And there are very strong indications that the real power is concentrated in the Department of Defense, National Security Agency, and the U.S. Treasury. And so once you've loosened up the checks and balances, once you've set precedents of riding roughshod over legal over the legal framework of power, then you've created precedents that whoever comes after you can take advantage of. Which is why they are all so panicked that Trump is going to throw them all into jail, because now he can. They have, and I know this from some people who are relatively close to the seat of power in the United States, that the DNC has done many things that is clearly illegal, and they left a very rich paper trail. So it'll not be difficult to prosecute them and to put them away, not just out of office, but into jail, large numbers of them. So they're very afraid for their own futures. And, they, in large part, they only have themselves to blame.
I think it goes both ways. I mean, you've got so-called Republicans that are,
Oh yeah.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think the corruption just goes across the board. And
you're absolutely right about that. Yes, it's also the what they call the rhinos.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of very corrupt people in the Republican Party who are working exactly the same, doing exactly the same thing, completely in concert with the Uni Party, and I think that they will all be in jeopardy once. If Donald Trump manages to secure the White House again, and I think that this time around, Trump will probably come with a different cabinet. I wouldn't be surprised if people like Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and people like General Michael Flynn and Colonel Douglas McGregor suddenly find themselves in the part of the executive, and then they're going to be commanding the loyalty of many similarly inclined patriotic Americans, and they will, I think they all understood how close the United States came to a collapse, and they will do some house cleaning. That's what I expect.
Yeah, I tell you what, I know every time I talk to you, it's like, gosh, we're, the time in history that we're in, because on one hand, you get up, you go to work, have a conversation with my friend over here in Monaco, go to the gym later, and you just, you live your life. And then on the other hand, there's all this other stuff going on. And it really is hard sometimes to just put it into some kind of a context. I mean, gosh, and then there's, with all this going on, you've got these tragedies. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about what's going on in North Carolina. It doesn't get a lot of run, but I mean, the devastation there is beyond anything that anybody's even talking about. With people buried in mud and just complete towns destroyed, and it doesn't get any play unless you're on social media. You can see this stuff, and so. Anyhow, it's really hard to kind of conceptualize all this, but
Emerson, just to finish on a positive note.
Yeah, that's rising note of hope.
When you're in the pitch dark in the middle of a tunnel, it's very difficult. Like it's disoriented. You can't tell where's left, where's right, where's forward, where's backward. But I think that the American people should try to appreciate where Russia was, for example, in late 1990s. It was apocalyptic. It was dismal. And then Vladimir Putin came to power, and he's been in power now for not quite 25 years. And in those 25 years, he's turned things around in the most spectacular way. So, the American people, when they're rid of the corrupt governing structures of the corrupt political class, they have all the potential, all the resources to build the United States back up to the stature that it deserves and to the standard of living that American people can have, because the United States is still one of the most dynamic powers in the world. With the best entrepreneurial culture that I know of anywhere in the world. People capable of innovation and risk taking and creating things. Vladimir Putin, I've heard him on numerous occasions always express this admiration for the United States, which he called it's a system. It has a system creating dynamic. The United States creates systems, and that potential, that dynamic is there. It's just being suffocated now. And once it's unsuffocated, once the American people can breathe with their lungs full, there's going to be a turnaround. And what a turnaround can look like, all you have to do is look at Russia before Putin and Russia today. And then, you can have a certain confidence that the future of your children and their children is a lot brighter than the pitch dark that we're in today.
There is an element of, and I don't know if it's part of the American DNA, whatever you want to call it, but you get gut punched, you get kicked around, and somehow or another, when people don't give up as a whole. I mean, between the educational system, between the pharmaceutical company, you could go on and on with how people have been just dulled down, have been, just completely try to be dispirited, I guess maybe is the word, and led astray. And yet I feel that too. I still believe that there's this force that people have to really overcome it and rise to the occasion. And I think right now it's just needing a leadership structure that supports that. And I think a lot of people just feel like they've been just beaten down for so long, as, I'm sure it's been similar, other countries and people are feeling. That's the thing, you talk about Israel, you talk about all these different, but at the end of the day, there's the leaders up here and then there's the people, and we've talked about this before. The people, they want to live their lives. They want to raise their families. They're not interested in being, it's like you said a bunch of times and written, I don't know anybody who's really out there. Yeah, let's go to war. All I can think of is all the suffering. I go back to Long Beach. I share this a lot, every couple of months. And we moved from there in California 4 years ago now. But there's more suffering. There's more homeless people. And, yet we're sending billions. It doesn't make sense. All this money going overseas to these wars that don't make sense to anybody. And here we are with our own people that are just suffering, starving, homeless. You go on and on and on. It's not a new argument, but it just seems more relevant. I think there's just a thirst and a hunger right now. People want to it's time to turn the page, I think is probably the way to put it. So, listen, I always appreciate your time. I know you're so busy. I just thank you for joining me again, Alex. I feel like I've kind of got like a privileged status with you and you come on with me since we have some connections, but I'm grateful for it. So I know I know you're on Substack, and you also, I know you shared, you have your Twitter handle as well, right? Or X, I'm sorry.
X, yes. It's at Naked Hedgy.
Okay. And then the Substack is Alex.Krainer at Substack.
Alex Krainer's Trend Compass. Yeah.
Listen, just thank you. God bless. It'll be kind of interesting to see where we are in a couple of weeks. And then, in a couple of years after that. But at any rate, thanks for joining me again on Upthinking Finance.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Emerson. Always good to join you.
Thank you.
Emerson Fersch is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.